This dress has been recreated by many fabulous creators in this YouTube sphere. I personally never imagined myself making this dress, not because I don't like it, it's simply not my favorite. I like all of her dresses, but in a very specific order, and the black and white one is simply near the end of the list. Also, my project choices are usually determined by what fabric I can find at the thrift store, and I literally said to myself, "Self,
you will never find enough black and white striped fabric at the thrift store to make that dress."
I was wrong. It simply wasn't the black and white striped fabric I had pictured in my mind, but it was indeed black and white striped fabric. And that's when the idea hatched in my little noggin to make Katrina's iconic black and white striped dress in zebra print for Ehler's Danlos awareness, combining my love of costumes with my zeal for bringing awareness to invisible disabilities. I think I'm going to start with the skirt. However, I do want to lay everything out, map out all of the pieces before I cut. Just want to make sure that I have enough fabric. It is a king-size bedsheet, so there's a lot of fabric, but these dresses take a lot. It's a good thing it's not the traditional stripes, otherwise that would take so much more fabric. One of the reasons I don't really like stripes. Also, they make me dizzy. I don't know if I need to figure this out because there's obviously going to be plenty here. Plenty to work with. Alright, so I'm not concerned about that. I think I'm ready to start cutting pieces out. I left the room and I walk back in and I see this. The amount of dopamine this is giving me is not much, but it's more than I'm used to. Why is this so fun? This is amazing. So I've got my panels, back panel, front panel, and strips to serve as tape and ties. It's pleating time. When I tell you that this process took a long time, that is an understatement, but I got the pleats pleated and I felt fairly accomplished. Then I spent a good 30 minutes of my precious time the next day trying to repair my glasses before I realized they're not that much different with only one earpiece. Actually, it possibly meant that my headache would only be on the one half of my head. Look at me, looking on the bright side. After that silver line discovery, I felt free to hem the petticoat. This method of hemming always feels weird to me. I have hemmed far more dresses and skirts from the bottom than from the top, so it feels a bit like doing something with my non-dominant hand or driving a vehicle backwards. It's a little odd, but I do like it. I settled in to hem the skirt by hand because I actually find it quite satisfying. After a couple feet though, I admitted to myself how wide the skirt was and how long it would realistically take me, and since I had limited time, I grudgingly took it over to the machine, which does an excellent job. I somehow just don't find it quite as satisfactory. Next, the ruffles had to be deciphered. Katrina has 3 ruffles, 1 large on the back and 2 in the front. The top one not quite going all the way around, but the bottom one runs the full width. I determined the measurements by using a very scientific method of taking a photo of Miss Ricci in the dress, doing a quick Google search to discover her height, and dividing her up into sections, and then I simply transposed it all to work for my own height. And here's what I came up with, but pay no attention to that because I changed it. And then I changed it again. Have I ever mentioned that I'm indecisive? I set to work cutting out strips of fabric. I meant to cut out all the ruffles at once, but I was thwarted. Which actually turned out to be a good thing. I'm going to take a break from the ruffles for a moment. A ruffle respite, if you will. I have not yet cut out the bodice, sleeves, and skirt that goes over this one. Now, I know that I do have enough fabric to make the entire garment. However, I am going to need to piece some things together. And I would rather piece the ruffles together than things to do with the bodice, the sleeves, and this skirt. So I'm going to go ahead and switch for a moment to the bodice, the sleeves, and the skirt that goes over this one, figure that out, and then I can return to the ruffles. Now, normally my method of pattern making consists of me just slapdash cutting out the basic shapes or draping to find the shapes. This time, though, I decided to use a gift I bought for myself. I appreciate this era of clothing so much that I determined this book would be a good investment, but it was a bit of a struggle for me to use, which was no fault to the book. In short, I'm not used to making patterns this way. It very much challenged the way my brain works, but I am glad that I bought it because I do want to gently push myself to learn to be okay with not always doing things the same way or having to do every single step myself. It's a beautiful book and has been on my wish list for many years, and it's still bonkers to me that it is mine. I've got the pattern pieces worked out. Who knows if they're going to work or not. That is why we make a muslin. I say muslin because that is the first way I learned how to say it. Some people say muslin, some people say toile, some people say mock-up, which that is literally what it is. It's a mock-up, a first draft, second draft, practice piece. None of them are necessarily right or wrong. It is weird for me to say mock-up because I learned muslin first. So it's just a little awkward feeling for me to say it. I do try to say mock-up when I can remember because I want to be communicative with as many people as possible, and I think that's probably the best word, the most well-known word across all levels of sewing knowledge. But I usually say muslin, even though I have never used muslin ever for a mock-up. I almost always use a bedsheet. I'll get those later. Some people might have some choice names to call you if you do use a bedsheet, tablecloth, or curtains instead of muslin. But please don't let them get to you. They're being silly. They might tell you that muslin is so cheap. Just buy muslin. I don't think muslin is cheap, but I've heard that multiple times. I know it's less expensive than other fabrics, but I don't consider it to be cheap. I consider it to be rather precious stuff. I personally don't think it really matters what you use for your mock-up. I think the most important thing when making a mock-up is to try to find fabric as similar as possible to the fabric you will ultimately be using.
After that, it was high time for a break. I took a nice, peaceful walk to enjoy the quietude. Well, I tried. I don't know if there's such a thing as a peaceful walk with a puppy. The next day, I was able to document my pattern pieces onto paper and cut out the lining and finally the zebra print. I layered the bodice pieces together for stability and then stitched all the pieces together. It was time to revisit the ruffles, and it was at this moment I realized that although I had already hemmed the skirt, I had yet to try it on to make certain it was a good length for me. I had measured, but I hadn't verified. Verification complete. I could then sew the ruffles on with confidence, which is what I wanted to do with great speed because I was nearing my deadline. Unfortunately, my body and my brain don't always agree. So I think it's time for a reality check. I hate those. I really wanted to finish this project by May 4th, which is today. So that's not going to happen. And I'm working on being okay with that. May 4th was the day that I set as my own deadline, and so not being able to meet that is pretty discouraging to me because I compare myself to my past self who could meet those deadlines, who could do things so much faster with so much more freedom, so much more fun, and a lot less pain. I know that I have to allow myself to do things at my own pace. It's just frustrating that my own pace is so much slower than the pace I used to go. It can get pretty discouraging, and I just wanted to realize that, and I thought I might go ahead and share that because I think there are a lot of people out there who feel the same, but it's pretty scary to admit because I have admitted it to people in my life and they haven't wanted to hear it. They're not there. They're not in that place, and that's okay. Coming to this realization that I'm not going to meet my deadline, I'm okay with it. I just needed a minute to kind of reflect and work through the discouraging feelings. I'm okay with it, but it is okay for me to feel sad about it. It is. Sometimes I just can't do the things that I want to do, and somehow I need to learn to be okay with that for myself. I went back to work on the ruffles, being sure to exercise moderation, a little bit here and a little bit there, with the majority of my time spent trying to get myself sorted. For real, taking care of oneself is a full-time job. I was beginning to feel like I was doing better when, figuratively speaking, another issue reared its unattractive head. You see, I've had a tooth that has been needing to be addressed. The trouble was that the last dentist I went to informed me that I would need a very large sum in order to address it. I don't have insurance, and so I determined to do my best to save up the money. It was very slow going, and before I could save up enough, the tooth got to the point where I simply couldn't manage. I couldn't sleep, I was experiencing immense confusion, and my jaw and neck became one because of the swelling. I was able to see another dentist to get a second opinion, and they quoted me a total of about a quarter of what the other dentist said, which I thought was a little sus. I still couldn't quite cover it, but desperation drove me to borrow some money. I hate borrowing money, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Anyway, all this time I tried hard to keep going with the dress, but I finally admitted that I wasn't going to be able to finish it. But after some antibiotics and a grueling root canal, I felt like maybe I could endeavor to finish the project. It was grueling for me, but I also felt bad for the dentist. Let's just say I'm not the easiest patient to work on. If you happen to be curious about the box, no, I have no need of disposable diapers. When bringing home my spoils from the thrift store, I simply use the recycled boxes they have instead of plastic bags. And a certain someone really appreciates my care for the environment. I'm such a good person. This is yet another diaper box I brought home from the thrift store, and I have a question about it. I will be the first to admit that I do not know much about children, but is it standard for one to have a full set of teeth at this age? I'm genuinely curious.
The dress is almost complete, however it needs just a few more ruffles. I need ruffles on the sleeves and then one very long ruffle here, here, and down into the skirt. It's an exceptionally long ruffle. Now the film version of the dress, of course, the stripes are going vertically, but the ruffles were cut horizontally. And so I wanted to do something similar. I wasn't sure if it would make much of a difference because zebra print, of course, is a little bit different from straight lines, but I did try a vertical ruffle, just a little scrap piece vertically and then horizontally, and pinned it to the dress, and there was a difference. I really preferred the way the horizontal lines looked, so I'm going to try to do that. The problem is that the fabric that I have left over, it would be so much easier to cut them vertically, because I do have to sew a bunch of strips together, but vertically I'd have fewer strips to sew together because I have a lot of length for vertical, not so much for horizontal, so I'd have to cut lots of little strips and sew them together to make a long strip to ruffle up. But it does look so much better, so I'm gonna do that. One more thing though, peeking out from the ruffle right here along the neckline is some delicate black lace, very pretty. I was gonna skip that because I don't have anything remotely similar to that, but I went to the thrift store the other day, bought myself some black lace trim, stretch, which will not work for this at all. But when I was pulling it off the spool so that I could wash it, I found a surprise underneath. It was some lace. I had no idea that it was there. Probably whoever stocked it had no idea that it was there. And at first I was kind of frustrated because I thought I had that much more black lace underneath. But then I thought, you know, this isn't that bad. I don't like the color, but it's kind of pretty. It's not at all like the lace in the film dress. Not even close. But it's closer than anything else I have. I think it could work. I think so. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this black and see if it looks good underneath the ruffle. So I'm going to go paint this and let it dry for a little bit while I work on the ruffles.
Gathering up and attaching that long ruffle was a time-consuming process. Was it worth it? Yes, but I will admit that I don't love how it turned out. I do wish I had made them less full, a 1.5 times gather instead of 2, but I'm not super upset about it. Only a little.
Well, that took so much longer than I had hoped it would, but the ruffle is attached. Now, get to see how this turned out. Not too bad. That looks decent. That's pretty good. That's actually really pretty.
I really love the leaf lace in the film, but this looks all right. This is quite pretty, I think. Yep. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and hand stitch this in, and I will be finished with the dress.
The dress is complete, but the project is not. One of the ways you can show support for those with Ehler's Danlos is to light up buildings in your area with orange lights. You can ask local businesses to do so. I did not do that because, unfortunately, the people in my area are not very community oriented. Let's put it that way. So I didn't really see the point in asking, and I don't have a building that I can light up, but I do have the capability of making light up dresses. So this is going to be a light up dress. And I wanted the ability to wear it without the light up feature, so I'm going to make a separate underdress with the lights attached to it so that I can wear them separately or together.
Remember how I said there's enough fabric to make this dress?
Obviously, going to be plenty here.
Barely.
We barely made it. This is all that is left, just these scraps.
You might say I was cutting it close. Basically, what I was going to make was the sleeve to go over all the undergarments. I used a bed sheet and doubled it up, stitching the pieces together so they wouldn't shift. I didn't want to add too much bulk, but I did want it to be sturdy enough to hold up the lights. I decided to not include sleeves because the sleeves were already a bit snug for my liking. Once that was a complete piece, I could then attach the lights. I considered several ways of doing this, but I went with hand stitching the lights on, and it did indeed take a very, very long time.
And there it is. I had to be fairly crafty about how I placed the lights because some parts of the dress have more layers than others, so they needed a few more lights focused in that area. So I hope I did a good job. We shall see.
Well, I didn't finish it by May 4th, but I did finish it in May, just barely. It can be difficult for me to realize my own limits and capabilities, especially because they are ever-changing. Sometimes I do take on more than I can handle, and it can be hard for me to recognize that. Even harder for someone who can't see or feel what's going on inside of me. Outside, I might look fine, but inside, not so fine. A lot of people have expected certain things of me because of the way I appear to them. They don't take into account that there might be things about me that are invisible. They don't know how to look for them because they don't know about them. And that's why it's important to me to become aware of as many invisible illnesses and/or disabilities as possible. I remind myself constantly to be kind. What can be seen by the eye is not the whole story. When you hear hoofbeats, think not only of horses, but think also of zebras.